This is exciting. I'm my pleasure to be here with Cat Holt, founder and chief brand officer at Cool OG. And Kat, just a little bit of background on her. She is the art. She was the architect behind one of the most enduring and beloved campaigns in insurance history, which was Dr. Rick from Progressive Insurance. And it was cool because I was watching TV just last night with my wife, and Dr. Rick came on and talking about the old the parents, type of thing. And she's chuckling over there at the ad, and I'm like, "What are you laughing at?" She's like, "I just think it's funny." And I said that's funny because I'm going to be talking to the woman who actually like put that whole thing together. And she's like, "Oh no way, that's so cool." So I have a couple other things to say before I officially welcome you. With a rare blend of strategic rigor and creative soul, Kat has helped legacy brands evolve, challenger brands emerge, and leadership teams navigate the unknown. Today, she's the CEO of Cool OG, as I mentioned, a brand transformation and corporate communications company that is redefining how businesses grow, making brand the engine of transformation, performance, and purpose. So I'm very excited to have you on the show and talk about building brands. Welcome.
Lee, I'm excited to be here. And I do have to make sure I'm doing a shout out to the rest of the team that created the Dr. Rick program because
Yeah.
obviously it's
Well,
not
I
a
know
one person
it
show.
was never
So
one person. Yeah, that's right.
yeah, so shout out to the team at Arnold whose creativity continues to be amazing. And so Sean McBride, Catherine Sheen, who did the brand planning, and Val, who was in charge of all the relationships. It wouldn't have happened without them and the team. But yeah, it was launched, I think, in 2016 and it's still going strong.
It's so cool. It's funny, and it's actually very relatable. I think that's the key to that success is that actually today's my birthday. I turned
Happy
40.
birthday!
Thanks. I turned 47 today. And I'm floating into that old man category real
I
quick.
know.
And so I can those, and having now older parents and seeing what's ahead there, I can relate even more and more. So the target demographic, and I also have like four cars because my all of my kids drive,
Mine
you know.
too.
So I have all the insurance and homeowner insurance, all that stuff with Progressive. So um,
Truth be told, I just returned to Progressive because of my teen drivers. It's
yes,
really, really hard to
it is.
manage that. The financial hit is, woof, it's
Oh my
big.
gosh, it's crazy.
Mm.
It's like every other month is add $200 or $400 or whatever the thing is that we're adding to our policy. It's like, oh my gosh, when does this stop?
I know, and that's when you're starting to say, "Can we just turn off the lights? What do you
Yes.
think? I own
Well,
the
I've been
energy
saying that for
company."
years. I mean, you know, I there's certain hills I'll die on.
Absolutely. You're like, kids, enough already.
Right. Well, I'm excited about this conversation. I want to talk to you about building brands. Obviously, you've worked at a high level and worked with teams at a high level and building brand. You've seen a lot, and so really interested to learn from you. I think as we look at insurance and finance, I think of them as very similar because they're both regulated. You
Hmm.
have there's this box they're sort of put in uh, from just a regulatory standpoint, like as a means of doing business. So they got to think about what they say and how they say it more than your average brand. Um, but it's also kind of boring. I mean, it's insurance. Like if we didn't have to buy insurance, we wouldn't.
Right.
It's not, the demand's only there because we're forced to buy it in a lot of cases. So, you know, thinking about that, I mean, and we're talking about the Dr. Rick campaign as sort of an enterprise level effort. As we look at the mid market, I'm curious how you think about branding for these boring companies in the mid market.
So such a good question. Well, I think that the place I'd like to start is just talking about a fundamental that is most often kind of overlooked in this day and age because we live in an immediate feedback, digitally connected world. Marketers are able to see a response or return on any kind of investment that's being made, and particularly in financial services because these folks grew up with an Excel spreadsheet, right? So it's like, bottle walking. How do I do an Excel spreadsheet? Is where I see the growth
Yeah.
for their
Yeah.
their lives. And the most amazing thing about brand is that it's really difficult to break it down into data that can fill an Excel spreadsheet. And some of these leaps of faith that we have to ask our business peers within the executive suite, it's really hard for them to do because they are accustomed to making decisions that they can model out,
That's right.
where they can predict, where they have a sense of, within a whatever X range of confidence that an outcome would come from an investment. When you go and look at branding and you look at marketing, there are so many factors that go into whether or not a campaign is going to be successful and whether or not marketing is going to fuel growth, most of which are outside of our control, right? Like truly, when you look at the model for how can we predict whether our marketing is going to deliver, the three top factors that are most important are things outside of our control, like macroeconomics, like the weather, and like competitive actions. Literally, those are the top three. And so then when you think about, well, then what do I do? It becomes really stressful to do things that are different. And so
Yes.
I think what you're seeing in financial service is, well, we need to make a safe bet because when we do, we have a data set for that.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
the hard truth is that by doing that, you're just commoditizing whatever it is that you're providing. And you're really missing out on the 20% or more sort of impact that great creative can have on your entire marketing outcomes.
Yes.
And so I think the challenge that we have is understanding the degree to which we're able to build that kind of trust and confidence within the business suite in order to try something that might be new or novel. And that I think is the biggest barrier that we have right now.
I think you laid that out really well, and I think a lot of marketers that would be listening would agree and understand that fully. Is that it reminds me of the Dollar Shave Club. I think they were the first
Mm,
ones to do the breakout kind of new kind of marketing, and it really worked well, right? But if you go one step back, you see that all the razor companies were doing the same thing,
yes.
and now they're not as highly regulated as banks and financial institutions and insurance companies, but it's sort of a good analogy because the status quo was the status quo,
Yeah.
and everyone was sort of in a boring space, and they didn't really
Mm,
want to rock the boat because sales were what they were. It's predictable
mm-hmm,
until you had what I think is a startup come on,
mm-hmm,
and they said we're going to swing for the fences. What do we have to lose? Because we don't have to manage any kind of legacy brand. We don't have anything
mm,
to lose, and they were able to jump out front, and then other brands could mimic because they knew it worked.
yes.
It was like this proof of concept kind of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in insurance finance, it's got to be even worse because you're looking around your competitors. Everybody's saying, "Hey, we all sort of know inside that there's more that we could be doing from a
Mm.
brand building standpoint or marketing. But since we can't manage it and we can't relay that to our shareholders or our board, we're pretty much going to just keep status quo."
Well, what's interesting about your example that you gave, the Dollar Shave Club, is that it did two things at the same time. One is that it saw the game playing field, right? Which meant that you really didn't have a chance to play against it because it was Gillette. Let's
Hmm.
just be honest. It was Gillette that made the game, that had all the stakes and had the innovation, brand
Hmm.
reputation, and money that kept all competitors out.
Hmm.
And so, what I liked about what they did is they tapped into that zeitgeist of, wait, why am I paying all of this money to get this shave? And do I need
Hmm.
five new razors in order to truly get the better shave? And so they said, no, you're right. This doesn't have to be that hard. And then they did the price play, which is the easiest way for somebody that wants to get into a market to be able to get somebody to trial. But their storytelling was very, belonging. How do we have people come with us? Even the name, right? The
Yeah,
club.
right.
It's those that are jumping off of the established bandwagon and getting into their own path. And I think that was a really amazing thing to do. That opportunity is available to everybody.
Yes.
Um, and I think the trick there is to really understanding who your audience is and not just selling at them, right? Not just saying, here's what we do, which typically when you think about, a company, what do they want to accomplish? They give you a really great brief and they say, here are the five things that we have to communicate. And they're all really rational.
Yes.
And oftentimes they're intended to be persuasive, right?
Yes.
These are the things that we do better than others. Um, but that's not how humans work,
No,
right? So if you think
we're
about,
actually very irrational.
we are, and actually most of our, I mean, it would be exhausting if we took life in and processed all of that information as if it were new, using all of the energy to do rational, frontal lobe thought processing. But we don't. We skip that. We do shortcuts all the time. And it's even more important for financial services companies to understand that, in fact, shortcuts are driving 90% of any desire, consideration, or purchase, because there's something in psychology and processing for information where if you have really high interest in a category, so let's think about it as a two by two. So let's
Hmm.
pretend that the x line is interest, where I have high interest and then low interest, top
Hmm.
bottom. And then you think about, do I have the ability to make decisions? In other words, the skills or the knowledge set. That's your y-axis, left, right. And so when you plot out whether a person feels like they're really interested in and they have a knowledge, all day long, persuade me, make it better, because I am interested, invested, and able to make that decision making process.
Hmm.
But a majority of financial service customers are not that. In fact, majority are low interest and low sense of knowledge.
Hmm.
And so when
That's
you're
right.
in that, you really actually have to use parables and metaphors
Hmm.
and analogies to develop that relationship, to develop that trust, and to say, okay, these guys get it, or these guys get
Yeah.
me. And
Yes.
that's where brand comes in, right? And that's where it's not going to fit nicely into an Excel spreadsheet, because
Hmm.
how do you put a number on a gut feeling about whether I can trust these people or not?
Yeah.
But that's the opportunity.
Yeah, it's huge. You look at all the big breakout companies that have succeeded in this way, and it was because they approach the market like you're explaining. Um, and so, you know, I'm just thinking about this relationship between the leadership or board or shareholders, whomever is kind of pulling the strings and asking for certain things, and the marketers themselves, or people who are operating the company. And it's like, so everyone, you could go into a board, you can go to the board meeting and you could just sort of lay it out and say, okay, we're all going to talk to each other like we're humans for a second. And I'm going to share with you, sort of like you just did, and say, here's just the way it works because we're human. And then I'm going to show you some examples of what I mean. Here's a little clip or a video of someone talking in a parable about XYZ, and you're going to see it play out. And I think if you were to go through that exercise with, again, rational leaders that are there for the good and they're not trying to, a lot of politics and stuff going on, they would all say, yeah, I get it. I think for the most part, they would say, well, I don't really understand this or that, but I really kind of get the sentiment of
Mm,
what you're saying. Right. But then the next step comes, which is the big challenge of translating what we all know and expect and understand, that this is what we should do. We should go in this direction, whatever that actually looks like for the brand. How do you translate that to a spreadsheet, you know, a two-dimensional metric that says that we were right and
right,
that is the right way?
right.
That's where the trouble comes in. And I think also it's the trouble of this word brand, because there are some people that are, when they hear the word brand, if they're at that level, they're like, I don't want to talk about brand. What is brand? Brand's not going to help us at all, you
Well, they
know.
still think it's a logo and a color palette and
Yes,
fonts,
it's more
right?
the visual side than it is
Right,
anything else.
right.
And even if you were to sit and explain to them all the dimensions of brand, um, you could probably win them over a little bit, but they're still going to be in their camp. But I think even for the people that are for brand, it's this thing that's really, especially if they're not a marketer, really this thing to really hard to get your hands around,
It is.
And then at the outset, then you got to translate that to metrics. So this is where it gets real juicy for me is,
Mm,
what do we do with it then? Right? Where do
mm.
we take it from there?
Well, and I think what that, I mean, that's the challenge that we as marketers all need to embrace.
Yes.
A couple of points that come to mind, we called it parentomorphosis, the Dr. Rett campaign, because it was the
Yes.
disease that needed to be
Yeah.
treated of turning into your
Yeah.
parents. Believe me, I am still not sure if it's an E or an O in there, but spell it as you like. Um, in order for that to feel safe, which is what had to happen, I had to make it really small
Yes. Okay.
because the executive leadership rightly had put brand as one of the top three drivers of the value in any of their annual reports. I think it was number one, listed number one with people and their operational acumen. I think rounding out the list, if I remember correctly. And at the time, the brand equaled flow in the superstore.
Yes.
And there was a belief that number one, if you didn't use that, then it wasn't going to work. And number two, if you talked about anything but auto, it wasn't going to deliver the business value because home insurance was added only in order to create a stickier auto customer.
Hmm.
And so there were two big question marks that was really making it difficult for people to feel comfortable. One was, well, you're not using flow, and two was, and you're not leading with auto.
Hmm.
Um, and so instead of saying yes, but you still should be spending X dollars in the mass media, I said, okay, great, let's just do it as a video test. Let's take the champion that we have in video right now. Let's do it for, we typically test it for 2 weeks. Let's do it in a 2 week digital run. And then let's map it out based on all of the historicals that we have to understand, is it driving leads and is it driving, you know, at an allowable cost. It was a 2x2 that we had. I cannot remember the other dynamic right now. Um, and it was in the upper right hand quadrant above everything else. And it was for auto and for home. And so by taking that test and learn approach, by taking a pilot, by making it small before you make it big, you actually are able to start to collect some data that will help have confidence. Now, that doesn't mean you have all of the data, but that does help. Um, the other thing that I think is really important is to make sure you're starting with your audience and their needs and really having a conversation at that level because I think it's very easy for us to think, well, if it doesn't have the concrete reason to believe and the call to action, then it's not going to work. But the reality is, we as people, we're so exhausted by the constant barrage of offers and things flashing in our face that we don't really process it anymore.
No.
And so I think that being able to think about what we're making as sort of a reflection of what people need and a better articulation of what the core cultures of our companies are,
Hmm.
we're able to come up with something that will be unique to each brand that
Hmm.
isn't really that easily replicated because we're both listening to what people need and we're also being true to who we are.
Yeah.
And those can be measured over time, right? You can do com checks where you say, what kind of a company would do something like this? And you look
Hmm.
for people to say things that are true for your culture. The worst thing you can do is to make an ad that presents your company as something different than what the culture is for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that's going to be increasingly important for us as brand and marketers over time.
Agreed. And I really love the idea of starting small. I think about it as sort of running experiments.
Yeah,
You could almost frame it as a startup business idea where
all of them are.
you're investing in something like that's really what the board is investing in the marketing department and those supporting to run this campaign and with the hopes that it's going to have some kind of return. Um, the what came to mind as you were talking is I think what's needed is a courageous marketer and a brave
Mm,
board, and a brave board for them to to seed the idea, not to seed the idea, but to invest in that seeded idea, and and use use a lot of rational historical data and examples like we've been talking about
mm,
to build um to build you know around the irrational thinking about an investing in
mm,
this effort. And I think that the courageous marketer has to be someone who believes in what they're doing so much. So they're taking all of the rational thinking that they and the board have discussed, but then they're taking it into the creative, and they believe in it so much that they're going to create something that is so new and so different in their space, and it's going to work. So the passion has to be there as well. So I think it takes both. And
It
I think if you
does.
look back and you look at these examples of Apple, and I'm thinking Nike, all these companies that were one way, or they weren't a company, and then they shot out into success. I think they had both of those elements happening at both levels. um,
They
it's
did.
it takes both.
Well, and if you go back to both Apple and Nike, what they also had was a very clear understanding of who they are as a brand.
Yes.
And there's not much that's more iconic than the "Just Do It" slogan, which is still true today, right? Why is it working? Because they had a position, right? They were going to differentiate themselves by marrying this notion of, hey, you guys are high performance athletes. We're like you. We're high performance gear for high performance Nike athletes. And they came up with this "Just Do It" slogan as a manifesto, a call to action, a call to arms that was so inclusive, and that partnership that they had with Wyden and Kennedy, that made Wyden and Kennedy,
Hmm.
that work that has been done. And they've been able to expand it since then into more leisure wear and, sneaker culture and lots of different places that don't necessarily have as close a link to the original, performance athletic kind of segment.
Hmm.
But they got permission to do that because they had this slogan that was more true at a human level, right? The "Just Do It" is inviting others to do whatever they need to do and express themselves in whatever way they want to, anywhere. And that's great brand management because they never lost who they were, but they were able to expand it over time. And I think often when we're thinking about startups or we're thinking about, mid market, they need to put as much time into the creation of who they are as a brand, putting in some of the basics, the blocking and tackling that we
Hmm.
do as brand planning or brand consultancies, to have that as an operating guidance alongside the business strategy, the marketing plans, and the P&Ls that they're tracking over time. Um, because when you don't do it, you let the business plan and the P&Ls drive brand decisions, and then you've basically lost control of your brand bus.
Yes.
So you got to keep two hands on that wheel, be open and willing to learn. But if you don't know who you are to begin with, you can be anything to anyone.
Completely. I was looking back at my notes here. I occasionally will write down thoughts that come in my mind, almost like shower thoughts. And I
Mm,
have one here on brand. Funny enough, let's see if I can read my chicken scratch here, because I think that brand is, and this may be taking it a little too far, but almost like a prism. You turn the light into
mm,
different ways. So
yes.
there's multiple ways to look at brand and execute on brand, and there's layers to it. One of the things I think brand is an external communication of your vision, mission, and values for the purpose of attracting your ideal buyers and creating a position in
Hmm.
the market. Um, I think that it has several parts. I'm just trying to read my chicken scratch here. Uh, Visual, message, and the modes in which you communicate
Mm,
as a signal, and the foundation or makeup, which is the company culture.
hmm.
So I think of brand actually large part. I think of the external brand visually should be demonstrating who the company is as a culture. I mean, what the
Mm,
company is as a culture, especially on a smaller scale, like these mid market companies where everyone's in the same building, or they're all connected in some way that they what drives culture. Um, that's the way I think about brand. I'm curious your
yeah, for
thoughts on that.
sure. Yeah, and now I'm not going to remember who said this, but um, there is a quote that says, "Brand is like the flip side of culture. Just live is culture lived on the outside." And I totally agree with that. It's funny that you're saying prism because I always think of it as almost like a cube. And you kind of, it's always going to be in the mass in the same place, but you turn
That's
a
right.
different front depending
Yeah.
on the audience and what room you're in, so to
Yeah.
speak, right?
Yep.
So I do think that's incredibly important because, strong companies do invest a lot in their culture. And actually, if you think about companies that are going to that next level of growth, one of the first things they typically do is make sure they have all of the parts and pieces in place so that when new people come in at a faster pace, they're getting briefed and acclimated into this
Hmm.
culture.
Hmm.
Well, we need to do that same thing to the new customers we're acquiring, who are either engaging with our services and our products. There
Hmm.
is an acculturation that happens.
Yeah, that's true.
And so when we think about telling brand stories, it does have to start from the inside because if there's dissonance between what is true inside your culture and the
Hmm.
message you're telling outwardly,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. It's going to break right away. And I was really fortunate in my early days to have a really talented brand planner called Justin Holloway, or named Justin Holloway, who is a Brit and learned from the kind of the British way. And so every time we would do positioning, we would do all of these interviews internally with folks within an organization. And we made sure that we would talk to the bigwigs because you have to, right? That typically they're the ones that have the keys to the kingdom. But then we wanted to talk to frontline people because they understood at that point of interaction how their brand comes to life with the people that you're serving.
Hmm.
And then we wanted to talk to newbies or young ones, the folks that weren't around for forever, so that we understood, the execs have this idea, the folks that have been there have this idea of who you are as a company.
Hmm.
But it's often the young ones or the new folks that
Yeah.
say whether or not that's still true.
Yes. Good
And
point.
so seeing gaps in understanding of your own culture internally will also reflect gaps of how your consumer is seeing it too, because we inadvertently communicate that externally.
Hmm.
And oftentimes when we saw gaps, we actually saw product strategies or service strategies that were diverging from the basic and the main. I'm sorry, I thought I had all of my devices turned off, and apparently I didn't. So that's on me.
Yeah, no big
Back
deal.
here.
Well, it's funny. It's funny.
Um,
I agree with everything you're saying, and it's funny because I actually have a bank as a client, and we've been doing work for a number of years. And the I like what you're talking about. How companies need to, when they bring on clients, they need to sort of culturalize them, or I'm not sure the words you use, but
yeah,
bring
culture.
them in,
Yeah, yeah.
bring them into the culture. And I think that's a great way of thinking about it because that could be the sort of rudder for onboarding and client or customer success
Mm,
because you're sharing and aligning with the identity, the client and the company's culture, and it's almost the opposite with the client that I'm working with because we didn't really have much of a presence. All right, let me step back one because I like what you said about that. But then I think
mm,
the goal of the brand is to start to introduce that culture,
yeah.
in all the ways, so that when they get to, making that switch over and becoming a customer or client, it's an easier path to culturalize them. And my client is the exact opposite, actually, where their culture really is their team and the service they provide and all the things they do is very robust, but it wasn't really known on the front end. So our job was to come in and basically put all that on display. And
Exactly.
it was cool because I was like, hey, yeah, okay, I see all the things, all the great reviews that people are giving on their own volition, and the hand holding and the kind of white glove service that you give. We just need to show that to
Hmm.
everyone that doesn't currently do business with you.
Yeah, and tell that story in a way that fits into their lives, right? Either the channels. So the interesting thing about what you just said is that, we talked about how a lot of folks think brand, it's logo and font. But you were just talking about the culture and a way for you to determine, or anyone that's listening to this to determine whether they have something of brand value that can be translated out externally is to really understand your customer's perspective and what they see that is good, because they can have a little bit of an outsider looking in way of thinking about things. I'm working on a company that does auto financing right now, and it was absolutely necessary to figure out how to tell their cultural story externally. In fact, they're grounded in a mission. They're
Hmm.
grounded in the positive impact that they believe their approach to financing, which gives financing for auto loans to folks that otherwise wouldn't get it, right?
Yeah.
Subprime, things like that.
Yeah.
But they believe that, every person can build a better financial future because of access to cars, because that allows for us to go to work that might be further
Mobility,
away,
literally.
or yeah,
Yeah.
or to go to class and educate, or to take care of our loved ones. And they absolutely are guided in that. But externally, they're vilified because they are seen as taking advantage of of a segment that otherwise, and so the big need there was to say, okay, we have to tell your story externally, which seems like a no-brainer, but it's hard for people who are in the daily, weeds to see it. But the other thing is that the folks that work with them, they were saying the same thing back. And so so when you're talking about measurement, if you do something like a brand health or brand tracker, and you see a huge gap between what the prospects understand your brand is versus your customers, and if the beliefs that your customers have about your brand and your company map back to your culture,
Hmm.
that's the data point sort of triangulation that you need to have, right?
Yeah.
Which is, hey, these are things that are true. The folks that you're helping believe it too. Um, Everybody else doesn't know this about you. And then the winning bonus is if you can link it by doing some kind of consideration driver analysis, which is what we typically do, and say, and these things are actually key drivers, and contribute X% to consideration. Um, that's the closest I've been able to get to fitting brand into an Excel spreadsheet. That in addition to A/B tests and market.
Just for a second, explain what you mean about the brand tracker. I think you said industry driver analysis. These
Mm,
sort of efforts or tools. How do you go about actually doing this practically so that it
yeah.
maps back?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate because I've had great relationships with marketing research organizations over the years.
Hmm.
And I am just, voracious about learning how to do what. And, I've got my little bag of tricks and I bring it forward. But I've been working with Radius, which is a US based research organization, particularly with a gentleman named Glenn in the financial services. And what we've been able to do over time is to use a type of research that is forced choice, max diff, that takes statements, and we usually have a pretty large blanketing of statements that are falling in within the functional, rational, and emotional sort of
Okay.
benefits, right? Believe.
Psychologically.
hmm
Yeah.
and what you do is you determine. There are a couple of steps to it that you can do. One is you force them to choose between, if you were considering a brand for X, Y, and Z of these five things, which is most important to you and which is least. And there's a platform called Sawtooth, which sort of gamifies it and allows for the things that are winning to show up more. So it has more battle offs, almost like a bracket. And the ones that are performing less are viewed less often because you're really trying to battle to the top. Um, and then the other way to do it in a brand tracker is you take those top performing attributes. Presumably, you've developed them so that they have a link back to your culture. And then you look at, for those that say that they are either a customer of yours or they're considering you, what else do they also agree? And you can do some analysis and modeling to determine of those attributes that show up most often. For those that say they are considering you, you can derive a contribution to consideration, and that's what a driver analysis is.
Okay. That's great. And then how do you take that and present that to leadership or a board in a way that they understand?
Again, we love the two by two because they love the two by two. And so you kind of look at the degree to which it's true and believed to be true about your company, and the degree to which it drives consideration, and top right box where it's believed to be true and also drives consideration. That becomes your sweet spot. for messaging, strategy, and approach to market. And remember, it's not just about ads or emails or direct mail. It's also about the way you manufacture the experiences so that every interaction ends up delivering on that brand promise, not just the words you speak, but the
Yeah.
actions that you take too.
Yeah. And because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I was reading the last little bit I wrote here about about brand, and I said the goal is of any effort of quote unquote building a brand is to build and maintain trust.
Mm.
And it's also been said as a quote, making and keeping a promise, as you just mentioned.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so trust has to be always in the conversation. I think when you're doing the work um, as a North Star, but also in the communicating of that to your leadership.
Yeah, and leadership really needs to integrate brand promises into the way they're managing their people.
Hmm.
It's easier when it's compatible with your culture because typically, when you look at performance reviews or compensation packages, a lot of high performing organizations have already integrated culture values into the ratings every year and bonuses that are earned by their people.
Yeah.
Um, I would add ability to use the brand promise and deliver on that brand promise as an equally important metric for the corporate level, HR and compensation scorecards.
Yeah. Right. Hey, this is awesome. This has been a great conversation.
So much fun.
Yeah, I've loved it. I think this is a an interesting place to analyze because if you have a brave board and you have courageous
Mm,
marketers, and then sometimes it's hard to get on both sides. But assuming you do, then I think you're about halfway there. Then it's everyone coming to the table already with the mindset that yeah, okay, we know how this works, sort of, and we know the gut is telling us to go this way, and we have all these great examples. We're going to be brave and take a risk and invest in something new to try to become a market leader or even just to grow significantly over the next quarter or year. So um, that's the magic, that's the sweet
that
spot.
is.
And I think marketers are looking for brave boards, and brave boards are looking for courageous marketers.
I think so too. It's funny because I've been seeing some ads for a creative platform that says hire creatives that will do what you ask. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, wow,
Yeah.
sure.
That's one
And
way to
an
do it.
AI creative can do that too. It's
Hmm.
it's building next to new that requires something. And the one point I would add is I think that it just starts with one courageous person,
Yes.
and you don't have to announce that you're doing these things that are courageous before you have some information. You
Yes.
can do it iteratively. You can have hypotheses and then communicate back out. Here's a hypothesis. Here's what we learn, and here's why I think it's important. Let's do more of it. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be more successful and get more people backing you in your initiatives than if you were to try and say, we're going to change everything. And I do think that we have a case in point from our recent history with the whole Cracker Barrel thing, right? There's
Yes.
no better story that shows brand is more than a logo,
Yeah.
because that logo just hit wrong, and I think they lost $100 million in valuation in one day,
Yeah.
and they backpedaled and it's no longer there. But the way I see it is they forgot that their brand stood for the old time country store.
Right. There was a
Um,
disconnect.
yeah, and that doesn't mean that you can't make that story relevant today. You can. Because we were just talking about teenage kids at the beginning of this time period. My oldest is studying sustainable agriculture and does farm stands in
Hmm.
her spare time. That is the new version of old time country store. It is still relevant. You just need to tap into what that is today and bring the rest of the branding along,
Yes.
and not do that hard right that they did. Because they
Yes.
did a hard right and it forgot who they were and it didn't work.
Yeah, it's confusing to me why you would change a logo that dramatically, uh, when it's based around and foundational to a brand like that, the culture that it is. It's confusing to me because I don't know. I I have to think that there was some good intentions,
I
being had,
wanted to, I'm glad you
but I
said that.
but
I'm
I
glad
don't
you said
know.
that.
I don't really know.
Well, so here's the thing, like, my heart, it's so difficult to be a marketer or brand or somebody that's making
Yeah.
something and to have a life experience like that. So my heart
Yes.
goes out to the folks that made it. No doubt a lot of time was put into it. My experience has been that some really talented designers work in some massive brand store design and brand platform and brand identity companies, and they are thinking about everything in terms of what's the best way to make this feel and look modern. But what they aren't thinking about is the rest of the stuff that we are talking about. And I think that's just because they haven't had to. They've been able to be very good and profitable. They've done some really sexy things. They've had great success in their careers, but this was a legacy brand, and you have to do it differently.
And a lot of times what happens is one or two people decide that they want it a certain way, and they
Mm,
tell them what to do, and they say, "We need
hmm
a new logo because we need a new logo. So
hmm
go give us a new logo." And marketing's like, "Okay."
Okay. Yeah.
Who knows really what happened? But I can tell you from an outside perspective, just with the experience I have looking in, it just seems to me there's a disconnect between leadership, whatever
Mm,
causing that is, and the who's on the floor serving the catfish on the table.
yes.
You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Because
Yeah, I do.
I served tables at Cracker Barrel,
Mm,
when I was in college, and my family and I would go eat there occasionally, so I know the brand in terms of being a customer, pretty consistent customer back then, and having gone on road trips and stuff over the years. Um, and yeah, I've seen the back of the house. Like I know how that place works, and nothing's really changed. And I don't think anybody really wants it to change. If you were to
no.
go in that shop and ask anybody any surveys, they would all say, why would you change it? Just I want more cinnamon smell in the potpourri. That's all I want.
Yeah.
Like they want more of what
They
you're
were
already
already
currently doing.
happy. Yeah. And I'm
Yeah,
sure they had data that said the young people were not connecting,
sure.
and build, you have to build bridges, right? And I think that's maybe a good, like, sort of ending
Yeah,
thought,
instead of
right?
taking a hard
Where,
right.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
like you have to build bridges between what people love about your brand and where the culture is going. You have to
Yes.
build bridges between what business executives and board need and what you need to do to manage the brand. And at
Yes.
the end of the day, we're building bridges between people. And so, not forgetting humanity, not forgetting the basics of why do people believe what they believe, why do they feel what they feel, when we're trying to solve business problems, because both have to come to play, even if they don't fit into an Excel spreadsheet.
100%. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you
Lee.
so much for coming on and chatting about this. If people want to find you, where can we send them?
I have a website, www.coology.com, COOLOGEE. You can hit me up on LinkedIn under Catherine Holt, Holt. And I also am starting to build out a Substack. So at Cat Holt, Catholt on Substack, and it's under Brand is Business. And got some exciting things in the works. So looking forward to building that out.
That's fun. Well, thanks again for being on. We'll have to have you back.
I would love that. Yeah, we should make this a ritual.
That would be fun.